what beauty does when we come in contact with it is it arouses in us a kind of nostalgia, that like a nostalgia for God at at the center of our person, right? Like we see something beautiful and it's like an echo of Eden, and we go, "Oh yeah, I remember that."
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we could make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Millions of people have walked out of the American church lately and haven't found anywhere to go. The books that name the problem are everywhere. What's harder to find is a picture of what you'd actually walk toward. Well, Morgan Cron is our guest today. He's an Episcopal priest. He's the author of The Road Back to You, Jesus, My Father, the CIA, and Me, and The Fix. 20 years ago, before deconstruction had a name, he wrote a novel about it and about reconstruction. It's called Chasing Francis. It follows a megachurch pastor who loses his faith mid-sermon, gets put on leave, and ends up in Italy tracing the life of St. Francis. HarperCollins, his publisher, came back to Ian and told him the book means more now than when he wrote it. It is relevant. It has resonance. In this conversation, we talk about the 13th century church, mocked in popular songs, entangled with kings and their wars, selling relics, and why it rhymes with ours. About Francis stripping down in the town square and walking across a battlefield to meet a sultan. About beauty as a way back to God, the difference between spotlight attention and lantern attention, the difference between a peace lover and a peacemaker. The point of this conversation isn't nostalgia for a saint. It's that the way out of disillusionment has always been a life, not just an argument. So join us as we discover the life of St. Francis and what it means for us today. Here is my conversation with Morgan Cron. Ian, welcome back to Shifting Culture. Excited to have you back on. Thanks for joining me again.
My pleasure. It's good to be here.
We're going to be talking through Chasing Francis, this book that you wrote 20 years ago that's now getting a re-release. I was just reflecting right before we were on where, the Odyssey is out and people are talking about, is it historically accurate? They're wanting something from the past to inform their present. You were reaching back 800 years or so into St. Francis. What do you think that we're reaching back for? What are we looking for that we may not be finding the answers here in our modern life?
In the case of the Odyssey, I think we're looking back to mythos to bring to us important truths that simple discursive analytical thinking can't deliver, right? Like when and this was part of the logic of writing a novel about St. Francis versus a work of nonfiction. When the front door of the intellect is closed, then sneak in the back door of the imagination, right? I could come to you, Joshua, and I could say, don't do dumb, bad stuff in war. It'll come back and haunt you, right? And if I did that, you'd come up with critical, your filters would go up. But if I tell the story, if like Homer did of the Odyssey, right, I'm going to bring it in and it's going to land in the imagination and be transformative. When I wrote Chasing Francis, first of all, he's the most written about saint in all of history. Okay. So I was going to add another nonfiction work to an already impressive list of books about his life. No, it seemed to me that the best way to do it was to craft it in a story about a modern pastor who is having a theological and spiritual breakdown and illustrate how the life of this incredibly important historical figure could put you back together if you were in that space and actually could speak prophetically to the church. What better way to do that than to get people into a story where they can identify with a protagonist that is, well, 20 years ago, we didn't have the word deconstruction, but that's what it is, a story about deconstruction and reconstruction, and you get to participate in it, and all kinds of truths get carried in the freight of story that can't be done in nonfiction.
What do you think you were chasing by writing this book 20 years ago? What was going on? What were you looking for?
So it's interesting. People ask me all the time, "Are you Chase, the main character of this book?" Right? And I'm like, yes and no. I mean, that's how when you write fiction, it is always a little bit of yes and no with main characters. I feel like I had many of the same kind of angsty doubts and questions, and I was in a process of, I guess, deconstruction. I'm not sure what we called it back then, but that's what it was. And it seemed to me that, I'd had so many conversations with people who would describe the kind of Christian they wished they could become. And because I knew about St. Francis, I'd be like, "You're describing St. Francis." And then they would bemoan the state of the church. And I'd say, the church in that, when St. Francis was around, was in similar dire straits. And he is historically credited with repairing it, like rescuing it. And so maybe we could learn something from him about what the Christian world needs in our contemporary context. And then 20 years later, now after the book was written, HarperCollins came to me and said, "We think this book has more relevance now than it did when you wrote it. So let's re-release it, relaunch it as a new book with some updates." And so I'm happy to be back where I started. That was my first book. And 5 books later, I'm back at the first book. So whatever.
Why do you think it has some resonance now, today, 20 years later? What do you think? I mean, it does seem like what you were writing about is now like amplified
Yes.
20 years later. But
Oh,
what is the
absolutely.
resonance? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I was, what, I went back and I read it for the first time in 20 years, about 6 or 8 months ago, right? And I was expecting to grimace all the way through it, like, oh, first book, oh. And I have to say, I mean, I don't want to sound immodest, but I was like, oh, pretty good. And I was kind of amazed because there was a lot of the book that I'd forgotten. And I was like, holy smokes. Actually, this book is kind of more needed now than it was then. There was a lot going on in the 13th century, very similar to today, right? First of all, the church was hemorrhaging credibility. It was made fun of by poets and troubadours, songwriters on street corners. People questioned whether it would survive. Popular songs, as I mentioned, were making a mockery of clergy, opulence, power. It was also the church at that time was dangerously embroiled and entangled in the world of politics. Like there were kings that didn't go to war until they got a sign off from the church, right? Like we worry about Christian nationalism and we worry about all this stuff. It's like, okay, this is not the first time we've been here, right? And then of course the church was deeply embroiled in war, particularly in the Muslim world with the Crusades. And Francis comes along, and he's the first. He actually led the first transcontinental peace delegation in history, and that was to the Sultan Al Kamil on the battlefield of the Crusades. And the impression he left on him was so great that Al Kamil said, "If I believed that all Christians were like you, perhaps I would become one." The list goes on and on. The commercialization of Jesus in that time, right? The relics, pardons, on and on and on, right? There was a kind of commercialization of Jesus. Well, look at the world in which we live. Whether it's, our music industries, our publishing industries. So I could go, and the book kind of goes through so much of this, right? Like, and the book isn't a rant against the church. It's just saying, look, there are parallels. And here was this extraordinary guy who lived a life that was so gospel centric and amazing that thousands of people, literally thousands of people, remember, Europe wasn't as big as it was now, gave their lives to this way of life, and then fanned out across Europe. And as Ronald Rolheiser says, the Catholic Church has been running on the fumes of St. Francis for 800 years. So maybe Protestants could learn some.
Yes, I think so. And one of the things that strikes me about St. Francis, as he started to follow Jesus in this specific way that he was, is that as he stripped naked, renounced things, in front of the crowds and saying, I'm going to live a life of poverty. I'm going to then, denounce war, and I'm going to live, a life of peace. You're thinking about creation, justice of the earth.
Yes.
Um, all of these sorts of things that he is doing seems to be a a total opposite extreme of what was happening with the church at the time, with opulence and war, nationalism. Do you think that it worked because it was so extreme? Like it was a really counter to everything that was happening at the moment. Do you think that's what resonated with people? Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening and thank you for supporting the show. If you'd like to support the show and get early ad-free episodes, you go to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com, and with your subscription, you could have a private podcast feed in your podcast app where you get to download early episodes before anybody gets to listen to them. You could also support the show by going to the support the show link at the bottom of the show notes in the app that you're using right now. That goes to a page that supports the work my wife and I do around the world. That donation is also tax deductible. So if you want a tax deductible donation, you could go there. Or if you want to support the show by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that really helps new listeners find the show as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. And thank you so much for supporting this work so that we could see the body of Christ look more like Jesus.
Yes. Well, I think he was startling. Also joyful, like he was a contagious kind of figure, right? And very kind of eccentrically wonderful in a way that was hard to resist him. And extreme. I mean, yes, uh, you know, Francis, like Jesus, understood the power of a lived metaphor, right? And so the kinds of things he did in public were like living parables that were teaching people as he went. So, for example, disrobing in front of a bishop and his father, saying to his father, I'm renouncing my wealth because he did come from a wealthy family and I'm embracing this life of poverty. I think the church needed that kind of shakeup. Do I feel like everybody today has to go to these kinds of extremes? Well, maybe some people, but many of us could begin to simplify our expression of the gospel in a way that would be very compelling to the world. Francis is someone who will make you thrill and also question a lot about the way you live your life.
For your character, for Chase in the novels, you're walking through the life of Francis in Italy. One of the things that looks like for him is a sense of spiritual homelessness, that
Mhm.
he's like, hey, there's some doubt that I have right now. He's opening himself up to, this mega church, and they put him on leave, and he feels like he's homeless. He's trying to find his way home. It feels like that not only was a part of this, Chasing Francis, it seems to be a part of your work and your life seeking home within the last 20 years for you as you're putting things out. How have you seen that journey work through this character Chase and even through some of your work that you've done since then?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've never had someone kind of describe the journey of Chase as being looking for a spiritual home, but certainly even more affecting is the question of my own life of searching for home. Home is a very powerful, energy laden idea, and we were just talking about Homer's Odyssey, and of course, Odysseus is trying to find home. What makes the Odyssey so interesting is, I remember in college, a professor saying that all of the Western canon of literature owes its existence to the Odyssey. So the Odyssey is the headwaters of all Western literature. And it is about the search for home, about the desire to go home. I always laugh because I'm like, well, you spend the first half of your life trying to get away from home and the second half of your life trying to get back. That's what it feels like. That's been my journey, right? And so in terms of Chase, yes, he's looking for a sense of home, a sense of an expression of faith that feels continuous and consistent with what is with himself, right? Like he's leading this megachurch, and at one point he says, I realized that I'd spent more time thinking about lights, camera, action than Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, right? Like, oh, right. And so he's looking. There is a search for home, and I don't want to spoil it, but in a way, he finds home and doesn't find home at the same time at the end of the book, right? I think for me, it's interesting. I wrote Chasing Francis, was my first book. Then came a memoir, Jesus, My Father, the CIA, and Me. Then came The Road Back to You, the Enneagram book, and then another Enneagram book called The Story of You, and then more recently, a book about the 12 steps called The Fix, about 12-step spirituality for everyone. I mean, listen, man, all of us are looking for home. And what always has been a passion of mine has been wanting to help people enter, and myself, enter into a deeper conversation with the mystery of their own lives, and perhaps to find home within themselves. And that can come through self-knowledge, like with the Enneagram, right? Self-discovery, 12-step spirituality is another way. So I'm always trying to throw things into the conversation that will be another pointer on the GPS toward home.
One of the things that Chase discovers, I think, through his journey is that beauty
Mm,
is a doorway to home. It's a doorway to God. How do you think that beauty is something that can point us to God
yeah.
and is a doorway to God?
Yeah. Well, of course, Francis was an artist, right? So that's another dimension of his person. And he used his, skills as a songwriter, as a actor, a performer. There's a lot of things about Francis that are very artful. And he understood the power of beauty as, listen, like this is such this could be a multi-hour conversation about the power of beauty to serve as a signpost toward that far off country. In other words, what beauty does when we come in contact with it is it arouses in us a kind of nostalgia, that like a nostalgia for God at the center of our person, right? Like we see something beautiful and it's like an echo of Eden, and we go, oh yeah, I remember that. You know what I mean? It's like, and it also, we know about the transcendentals, right? Beauty, truth, and goodness, that these are part and parcel of the character and nature of God, right? And so ways of understanding God. And to me, beauty has always been the most powerful, right? It's so interesting. Right before I got on with you, I was in a conversation with a friend, and I sent him 2 videos of the jazz pianist Keith Jarrett, who is a favorite of mine. And they're 2 live performances of his in Tokyo in 1984. And I said, now I want you to watch his relationship with the piano, and to watch. And because I always say, when you watch Keith Jarrett play, it's hard to be an atheist because he gets to the end of the piece and you want to say thank you. And if you're an atheist, you go, but to who? You know what I mean? Like, it's just extraordinary, right? So art, and I say this in the book, right? All art is speaking in tongues. It is what you must do when human language can no longer carry the freight of a spiritual truth. You then have to default to metaphor, to poetry, to music, to acting, to sculpture, to film, right? Arguably, I used to tell people, you watch Babette's Feast, right? It's like sort of like the standard go-to for people when they're talking about art, films, and Christianity. But here's the beauty of it. You might learn more about grace from Babette's Feast than you do reading Galatians, because you'll have this embodied experience through narrative that is incredibly rich and powerful. Now, that isn't a put down on Galatians. It's just simply to say Galatians is going to come into the front door of your intellect Babette's Feast is going to smuggle it in the back door of your imagination. And so that's why art and beauty are so powerful. And I think the church is missing its opportunity. I have mixed feelings about this, but you know, architecture is theology. When they built Notre Dame or Chartres or, these beautiful cathedrals, these were the building of them were acts of worship.
Yeah.
They took 150, 200 years to build. Whole families, multiple generations were building those cathedrals. And it was an act of worship for them. And the beauty in them, the otherworldliness of them, literally, I think are beautiful, amazing testaments to, they reveal an intelligence about how to reach the human heart. You gotta remember, the people who walked into those buildings couldn't read.
Yeah.
So they didn't have access to Bibles. So they learned everything in stained glass windows. When they talked about the light of God, at Notre Dame, when the light comes in through that rosette window over the front door, right? Like it's you. So these were buildings communicating. These were art. We've lost a lot of that because it's cool to meet in Sam's Club, and I'm a little bit like, okay, well, you better make up for that somehow. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot do.
As I tour Europe and look at the cathedrals in Notre Dame and others, and even St. Peter's, like you're looking at stained glass stories of Jesus. And I love that. Like I could just look at a stained glass art piece there and I could tell a story. And I'm immersed in a story there in the art piece that I think people were pointing to for a long time. I thought that was so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yes, I agree. I mean, it's extraordinary, and I also see the beauty. It is equally valid to say, "I don't want a building," right? Like, it's just I don't think it's an either or. I think there are both and ways of different facets of the same gem.
Well, Francis didn't build a bunch of big buildings, but he was he
Hardly.
was pointing pointing to beauty. I've recently, my wife just read Chasing Francis as well, and she read it a couple weeks ago. And what's happening to her recently is animals have been coming up to her for the
Mm,
last couple of months, and she's just been noticing all these animals coming to her. So
yeah.
I've started calling her Francesca, and she's so it's my new name for my wife is Francesca. And so as animals are coming to Francis and pointing, one of the things I want to know, why do you think that we have this image of Francis, and why do you think that happened, that animals felt comfortable around Francis?
Yeah.
What was he pointing to that we don't often get?
Yeah. So what's interesting is you're really highlighting an important part of the book, right? Which is, hey, by the way, in the Catholic Church, Francis is the patron saint of ecology, of the environment. And here we are facing an environmental crisis, right? And could it be more timely to read about how that Francis had a theology of the environment, right? It was very rich. The first extant poem we have in Italian is called the Canticle of the Creatures, and which is a poem from which we get that line, brother sun, sister moon, right? Where Francis had this sense of the interconnectedness of all things. So Francis saw himself in relationship. His relationship to the environment was an I-thou relationship, but using Martin Buber as an idea, versus an I-it relationship. He saw creation as an expression of 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 God to which we are called to relationship, right? And so that vision, that very contemplative, mystical vision, I think should be normative, right? Like, so, listen, there are some crazy stories about Francis and animals. Or I don't know if they're all true. I don't really care because what they teach us is what matters, right? Which is that Francis understood creation as like he really understood this is my father's house. And I am a citizen of it. And so too are the trees and the birds and the horses and the dogs. And I just love his vision of of creation as not an it, but a thou. It's a living thing to which we're called to relationship.
I mean, interconnectedness, it seems to be a lot more holistic view of creation, our part in creation, our relationship to that, to the creator. It seems to be more. I've been, looking through like indigenous type of theology. It looks like, the Bible was written through an indigenous people who saw interconnectedness as just normative, as a thing. And I think, hard for the Western mind to get into the interconnected mindset. It feels like there's a disparate thing. What helps to embody that interconnectedness that Francis saw, that we are interconnected within creation? How do we help like people step into just seeing the relationship between things?
This is a ginormous question. It's a good one, but it's not easy. Recently, I've been sort of like just reading a bunch of books by Ian McGilchrist, the neuroscientist who writes about these, the hemispheres of our brain. And,
Not short works either,
no, no, golly, no. Oh, my word. And not easy reading either. But, the left hemisphere, he would say, which seems to be dominant in terms of our civilization, is one that labels, categorizes, analyzes, grasps, wants to know, is always trying to figure out how something can be used for its benefit. It is kind of the bureaucrat of the brain. It is trying all the time to break reality down into bits and pieces. And so imagine you're looking at a stage. The way that the left brain pays attention is like a spotlight. So it just picks out one thing on the stage and focuses all the light on it. Now, what does the right brain do? It's completely different. It's as if, now imagine I flip a switch and all the lights on the stage go on so that you see the whole set. So it's the difference between spotlight attention and what I call lantern attention. The lantern attention is more diffuse, right? Versus focused. Now, why is this important? I know it sounds like, where are we going, Ian? Well, I think that when in the spiritual life, the goal would be to see the world more holistically through, right? If we use the brain as a metaphor, and I'm not talking about science here, we to flip on the switch to see everything in context versus spotlighting things, right? Spotlighting. And I think that's what contemplative spirituality's goal is to get you to turn on the lights, right? So that you see, oh, this is all connected. There's a whole thing going on. There's a big story going on here. And, even with my kids, right? I'm always saying to them, they'll have their attention just focused in on some problem. And I'll say, okay, pull the camera back and see the whole frame. See what you're looking at in context. And which will give you a perspective on what's happening, utterly different than the one you have when you're just focused on this tiny little thing. And it will also give you a source of wisdom and insight. Oh, and by the way, in the right brain is where transcendence, awe, wonder, compassion, and empathy live. Pretty important, right? Most people, particularly Protestants, have a very left brain theology. Protestants have a very left brain theology. Catholics have, obviously, when you get to Aquinas and Bonaventure, sure, there's plenty of left brain stuff, but you have this other whole part of the Catholic imagination that's much more right brain. When you start getting into the contemplatives and the mystics, right? Seeing the whole of things. There are ways to awaken that. Prayer, certain kinds of prayer practices, being connected to nature, being outdoors, get out of those dang cities and get into the mountains. Things like the way that we listen to music and work with beauty and art, right? Like, it's just poetry. There's ways of kind of retooling it's all about, and Simone Weil would be all about this too, right? Like, Christians should be known as people who have a different kind of attention. Their attention is different. The way they pay attention is different. And actually, maybe to the rest of our left brain world, a little eccentric. But nonetheless, I think that's the kind that Francis had and the one that we're called to have.
I want to dig into that a little bit. You said attention should be different or eccentric. What does that look like? What should we be attentive to and towards, and how?
Well, it's such a big question. So I think that our attention should be wide enough and broad enough that we are able to see the presence of God and of grace brimming in all things. That there is this awareness of, like, I think Christians should aspire to have a different quality of consciousness than other people. That we see the world differently. For me, I have certain prayer practices and things that I do that help me develop a kind of attention that notices what God is up to in the present moment so I can join him in whatever he's doing in that moment, right? That might mean practices that help me be more attuned to people and to what's happening in the present moment. It's, you know, I could go on, but I just think Christians should have a different kind of attention. We should pay attention differently. And we should pay attention to what we pay attention to. So, otherwise our attention will, as we all know from all the recent writing about it, will be cannibalized or hijacked by companies and forces that see it as money, right? They see our attention as money, and politicians who see our attention as votes, right? So our attention should be focused on other things.
Do you think that this is one of the reasons why Francis was able to walk into the Sultan's courts and speak peace? One, seeing everything is connected. There's this interconnectedness, and he was able to pay attention to maybe the goodness of God brimming over in other people that were made in the image of God and were, beautiful creations of God. Is this part of how peacemaking happens?
Yeah, well, it's a great thing. Let's make a distinction because I think most people think they're peacemakers when actually they're just peace lovers, right? And who doesn't want to be a peace lover? I don't want conflict in my life, or dis-ease from broken relationship. But peace loving is not what the parable, the Sermon on the Mount is talking about, right? And so literally when Francis read the Sermon on the Mount, he didn't read it as poetry, right? He read it as literal directions, right? Like, oh no, it's not like be a peacemaker like in the abstract. It's like, no, I got to go solve this problem with this guy. And so part of it was just the way he read scripture, right? Like it was just, oh, that's what it says. Oh, okay, I'm going to go do that. I'm literally going to risk my life and walk across a bloody battlefield to introduce myself to a Muslim sultan to try and broker peace. Right. And it's like, okay. And everyone just like scratches their heads. It's kind of funny. In fact, while he's walking across this blood drenched battlefield, Illuminatus, who was one of his companions, is like, is this a good idea? Like, he's like, yep, we're going to go do it. And so, there's this kind of beautiful naivete about Francis, right? Like, it's like, oh, God says we should do it. Let's go do it. See what happens. Right. And it's like, and he just got away with it because he had this radical trust that if he did it, that God would show up in a very powerful way. And we have a lot to learn from that.
We have to take Jesus seriously. Actually,
Yeah,
do what he says.
there's an idea.
It is a crazy idea, isn't it?
It is a
It's
crazy idea,
it
but
is.
it's I've heard crazier.
It's true. I do like that at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus did say, if you hear these words of mine and you put them into practice, you'll be like the wise man builds his house on the rock. And he's calling people to put his words into practice. He's like,
Right,
actually do these things. Don't just hear these words.
right,
And I think we often hear the words of Jesus, or we talk about the words of Jesus and go, those are beautiful words. We love these beautiful words. And then we just go about our day. Like for most people and most Christians, what is that then next step into following the ways of Jesus, embodying the ways of Jesus like Francis did, and not just hearing about or talking about Jesus.
Yeah. It's so interesting. You're actually triggering another book that I wrote in my mind, which is The Fix, right? How the 12 steps offer a spiritual path of transformation, right? And because really, it's basically when you read the 12 steps, it's essentially kind of the gospel in compression. All a person in recovery is doing is following the words of Jesus without knowing it. You know what I mean? Like for example, step 8, make a list of all people you've harmed and become willing to make amends to them. And then step 9, right, is go and make direct amends to such people wherever possible. It's like, oh, I'm just doing what Jesus said, right? Or and I think we tend to put people like Francis on a pedestal. Richard Rohr likes it. He used this word with me once. He calls it pedestalizing, and I said that's verbicide. That's taking a noun and making it a verb, but it's actually a good term, right? Like partly what happens when we put Francis or Jesus on a pedestal is it gives us a pass or an excuse for not being able to live like them. Oh, clearly I am not that guy. He's up on a pedestal, right? Like I can't do that. So it gives us like this feeling like we're off the hook. But you can't do that with Francis, nor should you do with Jesus, right? But to look at their lives and say, I've been called to a manner of living. And so I would also say we have to then, because they're such looming figures, and when we look at them, it's easy to get discouraged and say, I can't do that. That's too much, right? I got a family, I got kids, I got, job, I got, it's like, how am I gonna, do all this stuff? Start small. Just start small, right? Read Chasing Francis. Look at some of the things that Francis did and say, well, how does that translate into my life now? I wish that Protestants, I'm an Episcopalian, and so we do have monks and nuns in my tradition who are celibate, live in community, right, in monasteries and whatnot. And I wish that we had more access for more Protestants to being associated with monasteries or rules of life that they can join in. And those are available, right? But but because they give us some tools for reshaping our lives around the gospel and a community that actually supports us while we do it. Like I'm not alone. So I think about if you were part of the Society of St. John the Evangelist in Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's an Episcopal monastery, but they have a rule of life. And then they have people who are lay people who also live by that rule of life, a Benedictine kind of rule of life. And so I just wish we had more of that and there are Franciscans who do the same thing. There are lay Franciscans, but just get started, like get going. You will be surprised at the results.
Monasteries, places where there's community, that they have a real life, they're doing this together. There's lay people coming in and doing it with them. Like it is a communal aspect. It is doing it together. It's like, you go through the 12 steps, you need others to be able to do it with you. You can't,
Absolutely.
you're not doing it on your own.
So, no, you tried that.
Yeah, that didn't work.
that did not work. Yeah, no, it did not work. So, I mean, listen, I think it's interesting. One of the things I updated in the book was the study guide. And I'm one of these guys who is obsessed with the study guide because I know this is cynical, but it's true that a lot of times in publishing, you come up with a study guide because it's an additional purchase, right? Like that a reader gets, right? And they're usually pretty bad. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't put a lot of energy in it. Well, I put a lot of energy into my study guides. And that alone would really help you to work some of these ideas into your bones and blood in a transformational way. And really there's study guides that are great for groups, right? So again, you have a little community, you get together. Like, how can we do this? And particularly if you have a group of people that are in a phase of life of deconstruction or trying to figure out or feeling uncomfortable. They love Jesus, but they can't take the church, right? It's like, oh, this is perfect for you. This is perfect for you.
In this day and age, we are very cynical. Many people have left the American church. There's, millions of people have left the American church. In this time, is there anything giving you hope in the church? What what's giving you
Yeah.
hope in this?
Yeah. It's so interesting. I was on another show yesterday and we had the same conversation. And I was thinking about St. Augustine's quote. St. Augustine said, the church is a whore, but she's my mother. And I love that quote because he's just recognizing, listen, the church is a mess, right? It is a mess, but she's my mother. I can't get away from her, right? Like I think a lot of times we come to the church when people tell me, "Oh, I'm just disillusioned with church." I go, "Well, just understand that in order to be disillusioned with church, you had to have illusions first. You can't be disillusioned unless you had illusions." And so if your illusions is that this was supposed to be some perfect organization and everybody was going to be just great and and behave wonderfully and make the right decisions all the time. I mean, listen, you put 5 people in a room, you've got problems. And I always tell people, you think church is bad, you should come to my condo association meetings. I mean, if you think, you know what I'm saying? Like just put people in a room, you're going to get a mess, right? So get rid of any illusions you have. Right, like, you gotta lower the bar. Now, just I wanna make one disclaimer here. There are people who have been legitimately traumatized and abused by the church, and I don't wanna say, "Oh, you had illusion." That's a separate category. But if all I'm just talking to the garden variety disillusioned person, right? I just feel like, yeah, I do have hope. I think that, it's so easy to stand apart from the church and criticize it. And, cynicism, I once heard this great quote, I went, well, I actually had a phrase once. I said, I called myself a post cynical Christian. Like, I don't really want to be a part of cynicism. I just don't. It's a little delicious. It tastes good in a conversation with somebody else, like, "Meh, meh, meh." And I'm like, oh, I don't have any energy for this. I don't. This book isn't out to make fun of mega churches or, I mean, it makes some points about it that I think are points out some things that I think are troubling. But I do have hope because I just don't think God, Jesus have given up on the church. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. I can't give up hope as long as God still has hope in it. And I don't see any indications that he doesn't. And by the way, historically, the church has been in worse shape before than it is now. Just read about the 13th century and Chasing Francis, right? Like, it's been in worse shape and come back. If we're playing a long game here, yes, approach the church with a kind of compassion, but also, I'll say this because this was a Franciscan idea, be quiet. Listen, like, if you don't like the church, then shut up and do it better. I mean, if you want to be a prophet, do what Francis did. Don't stand on the street corner and talk about how bad the church is and what a letdown it is. Just shut up and go do it better. That is the most prophetic critique you can have, is your very life. Just do it better. And let your lived life serve as the most powerful criticism of the church that you could ever have. But, words, so what?
That's so good. That's really good. Yes. Be like Francis. You talked about earlier in our conversation, we talked about being caught up in a bigger story.
Hmm.
Right now, what you've done, I think, is now re-releasing your first book. It's something that happened 20 years ago. What is the bigger story that you're caught up in? As I know you've reflected then of the past 20 years and then where you're going. What's your bigger story? What's the thing that you're caught up in at the moment?
Oh, golly, these are great questions, Joshua. I'm like, whoa. All right. Well, um, first of all, recently someone asked me, I think it was on a podcast, they said, why do you still believe in Christianity? Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, they were kind of a little incredulous. And I said, well, because it's the best story I know that explains the way the world is, right? Like, it just does a brilliant job of explaining the way the world is. And I can get on board with that story, right? And I can participate in that story. And I relate to faith, not as a series of sort of doctrinal or theological propositions to which I just give assent, intellectual assent. To me, it's a story, and I am caught up in that story. of a world that is broken, bought back, redeemed. I'm participating in this great cleanup. This is a story I'm in. I'm also caught up in the story of my own evolution that has been fired and guided by grace. And I find it just beautiful. I'll be 66 next month, and I've been thinking about dying lately, right? And not in the immediate short term, but whatever. I think a lot about more of it now than I did at 40. How's that? And realizing that if I could end the story with my two last words being thank you, then I will know that I have led a really good life. If my last two words are thank you for everything, for my alcoholic dad, for my own struggles with addiction, for my beautiful wife, for my kids with their struggles and their joys, but for the whole kit and caboodle, if I can get to the end of the story and say thank you and mean it, it was all grace, all of it. The hard stuff and the great stuff, it was, as you know, at the end of, was it Diary of a Country Priest? Is that the book, Bernanos? Where he says at the end of the last line, I think it was Diary of a Country Priest, the last line is toute grâce, all is grace. Right? And to me, if that's the story I'm in, and I also say another thing. The story I'm in has been one of 66 years of trying to believe that God loves me as much as he does. And the older I get, the closer I think I'm starting to buy that. But that's a long story. That is not a short journey. It takes a long time.
Well, if you can talk to your readers of Chasing Francis, what hope do you have for this book in this current moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, as you read the book, have fun. Because it's a fun book to read, right? It's not, it's not all about Francis. There's this other parallel story going on about this pastor, and there's a lot of funny stuff in the book. And it's a pretty good tale about a guy in crisis and all the crazy stuff going on at home while he's off in Italy, and all these other people, some who are good, some who are bad, some who are, sort of have fun when you read it. And then I think, pay attention to read it with this kind of receptiveness to the possibility that there is a dimension of Francis's life to which you are being invited to try, right? Like, we don't have to make, don't become immodest and lacking humility and think I'm going to do the whole thing. Just listen for the invitation as you read it, are you being invited to a new kind of peacemaking, a new kind of relationship with creation, to, a new kind of, life, and then follow that.
Well, that's good. This new version, Chasing Francis, is out August 11th, anywhere books are sold, so people could go and get that. This book, Ian, was the very first. I always ask my guests for recommendations, and this was on episode 1, Chasing Francis.
Oh.
It was the very first book ever recommended on the podcast.
Oh,
I don't know,
wow.
450 episodes ago.
Wow.
It was Chasing Francis.
And here we are again.
And here we are again.
And by the way, I want to say that one thing that I'm really stoked about is in this iteration, there's now an Audible version, and I read it because I always read my own books. I'm like too critical of other people. This is the kind of book that's great to listen to, so I'm hoping people to go, oh, because stories should be heard, they should be read, but they should also be heard. And for a lot of people, this would be a really fun listen.
Well, I'd love to get a recommendation from you. So anything you've been reading or watching or listening to lately, you could recommend.
Oh, gosh. Yes. All right. So I have been on a Keith Jarrett, the jazz pianist's kick lately, his concerts in Bremen, Germany. I've got back and listened to the concerts at Cologne in Germany, but also his YouTube videos of him playing these standards just are exquisite. You just are like, he's rapturous. I listen to so much music of all kinds, from sacred choral music, Morton Lordson, to William Byrd, and everything in between those hundreds and hundreds of years. Stuff that I've been watching My wife and I only watch British television, which is so funny. It's all we watch. I think it's because I was raised by a British nanny. We just have been watching a show called Capture, which is like I can only watch one episode at a time because my cortisol is running at too high a level and I can't sleep. But it's really well done. And I could name about 30 of those shows. And what am I reading? I'm actually right now deep into Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary. Just finished Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, and I've enjoyed both of them. Although I will say, The Master and His Emissary is not. I do not recommend it. It is not. It is so thick and dense. It's like, yeah, it's going to take me about 3 years to get through it, I think.
Ian, this has been fantastic. So people go out, get Chasing Francis. Is there anywhere else you'd like to point people to? How can they connect with you and what you're doing?
Clearly they can go to ianmorgancron.com and everything is right there. They can learn all about the stuff that I do and all the Enneagram stuff, which I'm glad we didn't talk about the Enneagram today. Have fun.
Not great.
I've spent so much of the last 10 years of my life talking about the Enneagram. To finally talk about something else. What a treat. Didn't even come up.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask me, what Enneagram type is Francis? Anyway, ianmorgancron.com. They can also listen to my podcast, Typology, the Typology podcast, which is an Enneagram sort of centered podcast. Books are on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever fine or not so fine books are sold.
Great. Well, Ian, thank you for going deep into Francis in your life, in the church today. It was fantastic. Really, really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be with you.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out. Share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.